Pretty much everything from running to buttoning shirts to making sure you don't stub your toe on that table is done by the various motor and sensory pathways that work in synchronicity.
How does our body move our muscles? You might be curious. Well, that is the work of motor pathways. These pathways send signals from the brain down to the spinal cord to innervate the muscles. Fittingly, they're referred to as descending because the signal they deliver goes downwards. Let's give an example of a common motor pathway called the corticospinal tract, which is important for fine movements. Signals for muscle movement in this pathway can originate from various areas of the cerebral cortex, including somatosensory, premotor cortices, and the supplementary motor area. However, in this video, we will focus on signals originating from the motor cortex, which is the most common. The pathway begins when the prefrontal cortex receives our thoughts to move our body. It relays them to the aforementioned motor areas. The signal is relayed to the basal nuclei to process the intensity required for the particular movement. Super important process for building a house of cards. Again, the signal is sent back up to the cerebral cortex and then sent this time to the cerebellum, which takes proprioceptive information into account. This final blueprint is sent back to the cerebral cortex where it can be sent down.
This is sort of like a talk show. An idea or skit is created by a concept team that is sent to script writers and assistant directors to draft. The draft goes to a producer who edits it and makes sure that it is engaging but not over the top. Script editors take the final draft and make sure there are little to no errors when the show is broadcasted. The director receives the final plan and coordinates employees and producers on set.
So what happens after all this processing? In the corticospinal tract, this is the pathway. The signal is sent from an area of the parietal lobe travelling in axons that descend into the brainstem, which gather together to form large fibre bundles. These bundles themselves travel inside a structure called the cerebral peduncle. It looks like a packet of red licorice, but probably not as tasty. And at the medulla oblongata level, through an area called the pyramids, most of the fibres cross contralaterally to make a bundle of axons called the pyramidal decussation. The remaining fibres do not decussate to the other side of the medulla. Instead, they enter the spinal cord at the anterior white columns, where they finally decussate to arrive at the anterior horn cells. Fibres in both tracts synapse with lower motor neurons in the grey matter of the spinal cord and innervate muscle fibres. It's important to note the differences between tracts. The lateral corticospinal tract is responsible for mostly distal limb musculature. It coordinates things like fine motor movement, while the anterior is mainly responsible for gross motor movements of the neck, shoulders, and torso.
Now that we've covered one main motor pathway, let's talk about a sensory one. This pathway is called the dorsal column medial lemniscus. This pathway of the central nervous system allows fine touch as well as vibration, reception, proprioception, and more. In a similar way that descending motor pathways send signals down, ascending sensory pathways send signals from the receptors to the brain. Sensory pathways are described as ascending because, you guessed it, its signals go up. This pathway in particular transmits signals from mechanoreceptors, such as proprioceptors and cutaneous receptors, to the primary somatosensory cortex of the brain for processing. When the signal is received by mechanoreceptors, it enters the spinal cord via a structure called the dorsal root. It then travels up the spinal cord to the medulla in one of two fibre bundles. One is called the fasciculus gracilis. It carries information from the lower half of the body. The other is called fasciculus cuneatus, which carries information from upper limbs and torso. Both fibre bundles send the signal up to the medulla, but each synapses with a different nucleus, which just so happens to match their name. So the fasciculus gracilis synapses on the nucleus gracilis, and fasciculus cuneatus on nucleus cuneatus. As it leaves these dorsal column nuclei, it decussates over to the contralateral side of the brain to synapse with the ventral posterolateral nucleus, a part of the thalamus. At this point, it has entered a part of the pathway called the medial lemniscus. This pathway then continues to the postcentral gyrus and somatosensory cortex on its surface. This is where that freaky diagram you've seen comes into play. It shows which part of the brain is innervated with the location of stimuli received.
Now that we've learnt about two of the sensory and motor pathways of the body, we're going to end the video. Thanks for watching, we hope you enjoyed.